Hi everyone, welcome to my channel Bibbity Bobbity Books. My name is Ellie and this is going to be my fairy tale for grown-ups recommendations list. So today I wanted to create a list of fairy tale retellings that are specifically targeted towards an adult audience because I feel like the young adult category is saturated with fairy tale retellings. There are so many out there targeted towards that younger age group, but I've found over the years that I've kind of drifted further and further away from YA. I don't tend to enjoy those stories anymore. They don't really resonate with where I am at the moment, which makes sense considering I'm not a young adult. But yeah, I tend to find that the YA fairy tale retellings tend to focus heavily on romance, normally a first love, whereas I prefer things that have a little bit more complexity to them, things that push boundaries, things that tend to lean into the darkness of fairy tales as well, because if you look at original fairy tales, they are often really quite twisted. So I like things that lean more into that horror side and things that explore some heavier themes and just have an adult audience in mind. And yeah, I've really struggled to find books that fit within that niche. So I wanted to create this video today where I give you some recommendations in case you're in the same boat as me. If you're looking for that style of book, you know, something that has a fairy tale feel and quality to it, but is for adults, not for young adults, then hopefully you find this useful. Also, please do let me know in the comment section if you have any further recommendations for me, because like I've said, I've struggled to find books that fit into this kind of little subcategory, this niche. So yeah, without further ado, I'm going to jump straight in. Although I do want to quickly preface this by saying that a lot of these books do have some heavier themes in them, so please, as always, do check out trigger warnings before reading any of these books. With that out the way, let's hop straight in with the recommendations. So the first book that I want to recommend to you is, well, it's the first book in a series, a historical fantasy series, and it's one of my favourite historical fantasies ever, and that is the Winternight Trilogy by Catherine Arden, starting with The Bear and the Nightingale. So this book incorporates Russian folklore as well as medieval history to create this fantasy story, and the writing is so atmospheric in this one. The moment you read this story, you feel like you're transported, that you're in this fairy tale setting. This story follows our main character Vasilisa, who is a young girl. She's a bit of a wild child. She lives in this remote town in northern Russia with her father, and she spends a lot of time outdoors exploring the forest that surrounds her village. And she's a little bit different from the other villagers. She is very much connected to the old ways, so she can actually see household spirits and she can see, you know, fey creatures that live in the forest, and you know, that's never really been a problem before. She's quite liked it. They are her companions in a way. But then everything changes when her father goes to Moscow to seek a new wife. Vasilisa's mother actually died in childbirth, so she's been motherless most of her life, but her father decides it's about time that he has a new wife, so he goes off and he brings home this woman who's actually a devout Christian, and she's very frightened and she sees Vasilisa kind of as a threat. She feels like the old ways and the things that Vasilisa can see are the work of demons or the devil, and so she decides to bring a priest to the town to kind of rid the village of their old traditions and to start up this new religion, so kind of converting everyone to an organised religion. And following on from that, things start to go wrong, crops fail, you know, there's this darkness in the forest that creeps closer and closer, and Vasilisa is the only one that can see a connection between you know, getting rid of old traditions and these problems that are starting to arise. And so she sets out to try and save her people, and that's kind of the premise of this story really. I really enjoyed how this wove in historical facts, you know, historical figures into the narrative. I liked the discussion of pagan sort of religion versus organised religion, and of course it has fairy tale elements in there. It has the Winter King in here, who is a figure from folklore, but it also has all of the things that you might expect from a fairy tale like story. It's got the sort of evil stepmother who replaces the loving and kind mother who died. You've got a dark creepy forest, you've got fey creatures, and so yeah, it just feels like a real fairy tale, but it also has a lot going on with the plot, a lot going on with the world, and a lot to sink your teeth into. So yeah, I love this one and would highly recommend it to you if any of that sounds interesting. The next book that I want to recommend to you is Silver in the Woods by Emily Tesh. This one is the first book in a fantasy duology, and they're both novellas, so they're nice and short, and they're inspired by the Green Man, who is this kind of pagan figure, almost like a forest god who represents the renewal of the seasons. He represents life, death and rebirth, and this is just such a beautiful story and such a celebration of nature, and I loved it. It's got a little bit of eeriness and creepiness to it, but it was also quite a heartwarming story as well, so it's a lovely balance. So in this story we follow our main character Henry Silver, who is a folklorist, and he inherits this estate, and the estate includes an ancient forest called Green Hollow, and within that forest lives a man called Tobias. So he lives in a hut in the forest, and the two men get to know each other, they form a friendship, and our main character Henry Silver starts to uncover why Tobias is connected to this forest, and he kind of brings up some events from Tobias's past and some secrets and things like that, and that's all you really need to know going into this one. Like I said before, this is such a celebration of nature, and you get that through the prose because there's lots of gorgeous descriptions of the forest, of being outdoors, and it made me want to just go out and be in a forest and to breathe in the scents and the smells and to just be surrounded by nature. So yeah, I really loved this story. I thought it was very beautiful and very enchanting. The next book that I want to recommend to you is Daughter of the Forest by Juliette Marillier. This is actually the first book in a series, but you can definitely read this as a standalone. So this story is a retelling of the Six Swan Brothers, I believe it's called. And it follows our main character Sourdough, or Sorka, I'm never quite sure how to pronounce her name, but she has 6 brothers and they are cursed by a wicked enchantress. They are turned into swans, and so we follow our main character who is trying to break this curse and to free her brothers, and in order to do that she has to sew 6 sweaters out of nettles, so it's an incredibly painful and grueling task that she has to do, and to make matters worse she is not able to make a sound while she does it, so she has to be completely mute. And what I loved about this book is how expressive our main character is, given the fact that she can't speak and she can't use any kind of formal sign language or anything to communicate with others around her, but she very much makes herself heard, and I really enjoyed that in this story. Again, this one is incredibly atmospheric and luscious with its descriptions. It's a historical fantasy, so it's set in medieval Ireland. There's a lot of descriptions of the forest. It's often quite a cold winter setting as well, so again, perfect for this time of year. It is quite slow. It's a very thick book, and you know, you are just spending a lot of time with our main character, so some people might say that's boring. I personally felt like it was a beautiful way to really get to grips with our main character and to go through, you know, the highs and lows, or quite a lot of lows really, with our character. You know, you really feel how difficult this task is to complete because you're with her every step of the way. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. It was both beautiful and also incredibly heartbreaking. I will say there is one very difficult scene to read in here that involves sexual assault, so please be careful going into this one, but I think it is handled quite well, and you see the ramifications of that as well. It's not something that's glossed over. It's very much an impactful, obviously, moment for our character. And I just loved how this talks about, you know, the relationship between siblings as well. That's kind of the central theme, I would say, within this book. Yes, there is a little bit of a slow burn romance in here, but primarily it's a focus on our main character and her love for her brothers and the extremes that she will go to save them. My next recommendation for you is the Book of Gothel by Mary McMine. So this is a Rapunzel retelling, but it's a twist on the Rapunzel tale, because the tagline says, "Everyone knows the story of Rapunzel in the tower, but do you know the tale of the witch who put her there?" So this one isn't focusing on Rapunzel's main character, it's obviously focusing in on the witch, and it follows our main character Halewise, who is a young girl, and she is very much ostracised by the people around her. She's kind of shunned by her village because she's a little bit different. So she has black eyes and she's prone to these fainting episodes. But her mother has always been there to protect her until she's not. So one day, unfortunately, Halewise's mother dies, and Halewise is forced to flee her village for her own safety, and she seeks refuge in this tower called the Tower of Gothel. And when she's there, she realises that she's not the only woman who is seeking refuge. And I feel like that's all you really need to know going into this one, because I don't want to get into spoiler territory. But I thought this was a really interesting book. Again, this one weaves historical elements with folklore elements as well to make the story feel very grounded. And what I really enjoyed about this one was some of the themes in this book. It was very much a discussion about motherhood in its various different forms. It was a story about inequality and misogyny, and it's just something that you can really sink your teeth into. Again, it discusses more than just a surface level fairy tale, and it was just quite an interesting character focused story. So yeah, I did enjoy this one. My next recommendation for you is a little bit lighter, and that is Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. So this one is a story that has been inspired by some specific fairy tales, specifically The Goblin Market from Christina Rossetti's poem, but it also includes sort of some concepts and themes that you might expect from fairy tales, such as, you know, bargains with the fae and glamours and those kinds of things that you see quite commonly in fairy tale like stories. So yeah, this one reads very much like a fairy tale, but what I like about it is that T. Kingfisher twists some of our expectations. She turns some of these tropes on their heads, so while it feels like a classic fairy tale, it is also quite fresh and quite different. So in this story we follow our main character Mara, who is essentially trying to save her sister from an abusive marriage. She is married to the prince, who is incredibly abusive towards her, so Mara is trying to rescue her, and she seeks help from this incredibly powerful grave witch, and she kind of collects a ragtag group of individuals to help her on her quest to go and save her sister. And it's a fun time. I feel like this strikes a really good balance between creepiness but also comedy. There are some moments that will have you chuckling, some really unique ideas in here, a fun cast of characters, a nice found family element at the heart of it. I enjoy that this plot is driven by sisterly love rather than the focus being on romance, which again you tend to find a lot in YA stories. And I just had a fun time with this one. It's a standalone, it's not too long, it's quick and easy, and it's very atmospheric. So yeah, I definitely recommend that one. The next book that I was going to mention in this video was Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reid, which is the book that I'm currently reading. I haven't finished it yet, but I'm not sure that I can really recommend this one just because of how difficult this book is. This is honestly one of the most disturbing books that I have ever read. I haven't finished it yet, so I don't have my final thoughts on this one for you, but my goodness, this one is so dark. It's incredibly graphic, it's incredibly gruesome. It has pretty much every content warning out there included within this book, and there are a lot of explicit scenes that are written on the page as well, so there's really no escape from it. It is very dark, and I really want to say that because please be careful going into this one. I found it quite difficult to get through, quite difficult to read. I have to keep putting it down and picking something else up because it is so heavy. So for that reason I'm not sure I can necessarily recommend this one, but I do want to just briefly mention it. So this is a retelling of Juniper and Thorn, which is a Grimm fairy tale, I believe, one of the Grimm brothers fairy tales. And it's essentially a story about our main character who is in a abusive household. Her father keeps her under lock and key. She's experienced a lot of trauma in her childhood and through into her adulthood. One day she escapes, she goes out, she gets a little taste of freedom, and then everything kind of comes crumbling down from there. So yeah, it's a story about her essentially trying to find her identity following extreme abuse and trauma in her life, but it's with the backdrop of it being a fantasy horror. So she is actually a witch. She can detect people's ailments through touch. Her father is a wizard, so he uses curses and his magic to control his daughters. So yeah, it has that kind of fairy tale vibe to it, but it is so graphic. A lot of gore, a lot of body horror, a lot of you know, incidents of sexual assault, really tough stuff in here, so please be careful. But yeah, if you want to hear my full thoughts of this one after I've read it, I will be filming my wrap up very soon of all the books that I read in September, so keep an eye out for that video. Then I wanted to recommend to you some short story collections. So the first one that I'm going to mention is Sourdough and Other Stories by Angela Slatter. So this is kind of a horror short story collection of fairy tale like stories that all have a common theme of love and loss. So Angela Slatter has a very poetic writing style which I feel lends itself quite well to fairy tale like stories, but it might not be for everybody. But yeah, this is, you know, a selection of very creepy, haunting tales that read like a true fairy tale in that they are dark. It's not always necessarily a happy ending. It's the complete opposite to like a Disney fairy tale, you know, where everything's okay in the end. It kind of leans into the origins of fairy tales and kind of the real nitty-gritty dark stuff. So yeah, that one is an interesting collection. And then there's another one that I wanted to mention that I haven't read yet but is on my TBR, and that is Fairytales, Stories of the Grim and Gruesome. And I'm just going to read you from the synopsis of this one because I've not read it. So this one says, 200 years ago, two brothers, Jacob and Wilhelm, collected together a large selection of folk and fairy tales and published them as children's and household tales. So successful was the first collection of 88 stories that they kept adding more to subsequent editions. Since then, the tales of the Brothers Grimm have been translated into upwards of 100 different languages and are known and loved throughout the world. Now, award-winning editor Stephen Jones has tasked some of the brightest and best horror writers in Britain, America and Europe with reinterpreting some of the traditional stories, putting a decidedly darker spin on the classic tales. So yeah, I love the idea that they are taking those stories that we are all familiar with and editing them, making them darker. I don't quite know how they're going to make them darker because I feel like the original stories are actually quite dark themselves. So that'll be really interesting. But yeah, sort of a collection of horror authors coming together to retell some of these stories. So I think that would be a real fun one. So hopefully I will get my hands on that short story collection at some point. Okay, and the final book that I wanted to mention is actually a graphic novel, and that is Snowglass Apples by Neil Gaiman. I do have a copy somewhere, but I can't find it anywhere, so I'll just have to put an image on the screen for you. But yes, this is a very dark retelling of the Snow White fairy tale. Again, it's kind of twisting what you expect, so it's a little bit surprising. It is very short, this one, so it's only a really quick story, but the standout thing is absolutely the artwork. It has almost like a stained glass type style to it, which I really enjoy. And yeah, the story is deliciously dark as well, so that is a fun one. And yeah, that brings me to the end of this video. Those were my selection of fairy tale stories for adults. I hope that you've enjoyed it. I hope that it's been useful. Let me know if you've read any of these books before and what you thought. Like I said in the beginning, if you have any further recommendations for me, please do drop them in the comment section below. And yeah, I'm wishing you all the best. I hope you're having a fantastic day, whatever it is you're doing, wherever you are. Don't forget to like this video if you did like it, subscribe if you want to see some more from me, and I guess I'll see you next time with another video. Bye!